Welcome back to YouTube's only channel dedicated to the topic of Alabama remote notarizations. My name is Michelle, and I want to thank all 34 of you for subscribing to the channel. I mean that. And I would love to hear from you, especially those of you who have attempted to perform remote notarizations, or if you're doing it on a regular basis. I want to hear what's working well for you and what's been a challenge so far. In our last video, I covered who can be a remote Alabama notary, and I think we were a little surprised, some of us, just how easy it is to qualify to be a remote notary. Well, today's video is going to cover some real details around how Alabama's remote notary law differs from remote notarizations in other states. And to help with that, I really want to share my screen. Give me just a moment. I feel it's really important for us to talk about the difference between remote online notarization and remote ink notarization, because once you have that clear understanding, you'll be better prepared to handle questions like, what platform should I use? Do I need a electronic signature, that sort of thing. So that's what I want to tackle with you today. So again, from here on out, I'm going to be referring to remote online notarizations as RON and remote ink notarizations as REN, just so that we're all on the same page. All right, just a brief overview. With remote online notarization, you see that the notary and the signer meet online by both logging on to the same RON application, also known as a platform. And so they're signing in from different locations and meeting up on the platform. In some states, that platform must be state approved or state sanctioned. All right, again, we're talking about RON. Also with RON, every aspect of the notarization takes place online. The entire process is paperless until the very end. And then once the notarization is completed, the signer has the option of printing out the final notarized document, and that's when you have a tangible item. And reviewing a RON notarized document, it is crystal clear that the notarization took place online because of all of the electronic interfacing. And I'll show you what I mean by that in just a moment. With remote online notarization, typically, I can't speak for all states, but the signer produces one form of government issue ID and is also required to answer some knowledge-based authentication questions. And again, that's going to vary by state. The other requirements are there is going to be an electronic document, and so the signer will scan in or take a picture of a paper form or paper document that they want notarized, and then from that point, once it is uploaded into the platform, it becomes an electronic document. The signer or the customer's signature is electronically signed. Most of us have produced an electronic signature by now, at least once or twice. The notary's signature is also an electronic signature. The notary's official seal, also referred to as a stamp, is electronic. The notary certificate, the section of the form that the notary normally completes, that has special remote online notarization wording, making it clear that the document was notarized remotely and online. And it's my understanding that most, if not all, RON platforms include a remote or electronic journal that will be signed with electronic signatures. And of course, there is the RON platform. So there are numerous platforms out there for notaries, for RON notaries to choose from. Really, I'm willing to bet at least 50 RON platforms exist. And in the states that are approved for RON, it is up to the state and the notary to select a platform that complies with their state requirements. So that's your crash course on RON. Again, I'm being deliberately general and high level because what we're really interested in is something different. So let's get into that. Alabama has had for the last 3 or so years remote ink notarization. We're going to refer to it as RIN. With RIN, part of the notarization takes place online and the other part takes place offline. With RIN, both the notary and the signer meet on a video conference application. Very similar to what I'm using to record this video. I'm using Zoom. And yes, as a remote Alabama notary, I currently use Zoom to meet with the remote signers. Now, Alabama did not force me or require me to use Zoom. I chose it for a variety of reasons. One, I'm familiar with it. I use it for training. I wanted to use a platform that I'm comfortable with and knowledgeable of. There are others out there. There is WebEx, there's GoToMeeting, and that's just two. I can't think of any other right now, but Alabama simply requires that we use a video conference software or application to conduct RINs. They leave it up to us to choose which application we select, but the the law does include some important stipulations. It has to be simultaneous. I have to see the signer, hear the signer at the same time, vice versa. The signed document must travel, let me back up. I skipped the third bullet, which is the notary and the signer must both use traditional ink pens in order to sign their name and fill out the notary certificate. So yes, it's just old school writing ink pen. Okay? That's what happens on camera. And then the signed document gets mailed from the signer to the notary to complete the notary's part of the notarization, filling out the notary certificate, venue, signer's name, the date, and then the notary credentials. And recording it in a log, and then returning it back to the signer, or if the signer or customer wants it to travel somewhere else, then the notary and the signer can make arrangements to have that notarized document forwarded to a different location. It is very difficult to detect that a document was signed and notarized remotely in Alabama. Why? Because it looks the same as an in-person notarization. Now, yes, there is a remote notarization certificate, notary certificate, that was just released less than a year ago, but it has not gained a lot of traction yet. It hasn't been incorporated in many documents, but there is one out there. You can find it on the Alabama Probate Judges Association website. I'll be sure to include a link to that website so you can find that certificate. I've used it once or twice, but based on the documents that I've been notarizing, those documents don't accept a loose certificate to be attached to it. With remote ink notarization, typically not even typically, the identification requirements are quite involved, quite lengthy. First of all, the signer or the customer must produce one valid government issue ID card that has the signer's photograph and signature. The customer must also produce a second government issued ID card. And then finally, the notary must verify the signer's identity or verify it by checking public or private sources. And I know that is somewhat vague. And it is vague. And this is something that I believe has proven to be challenging for many Alabama notaries, knowing what qualifies as checking public or private sources. Fortunately for me, I have a way to access that information because I am also a licensed private investigator, so I'm able to have access to both public and private sources without much difficulty. Now, it's at a cost to me, but still I can easily request it with the permission of the customer. If I did not have access to that, it would probably take longer and it might even cost more. But again, the way that Alabama law reads, the way I understand it, notaries must satisfy all three of those requirements. It's not one or two or three, it is all three. I'll make sure we come back to the identification requirements in another video, But before I leave it, I did want to state that in Alabama, if you personally know the customer or the signer, you do not have to require any additional identification. Other requirements for RIN include a paper document. So where with Ron, you scanned in the form, there is no scanning it in. In fact, once the paper document has been signed by the customer, it cannot be scanned in or faxed. The original wet signature must be mailed to the notary for notarization. Now, that was not the case during COVID when we were permitted to conduct remote ink notarizations under Governor Ivey's emergency proclamation. We were able to scan in and fax those signed documents. But once the new law was passed, it clearly states wet signatures are needed. And so that means the customer signs with ink, the notary signs with ink, everyone's using an ink pen. And it's preferred that that ink pen be either black or blue. You do have that option. As the notary, we can choose to either use our official seal, the ink seal, or the embosser. Even though for traditional in-person notarizations, journals are optional, for remote ink notarizations, it is a requirement. So I use a journal anyway for traditional notarizations, and so I simply continue and record my RIN notarizations in that same journal. I thought about keeping a different journal for remotes, but I really like having everything together. No, the signer does not sign their name, but what I do is I make a note on the signature line that this was a remote notarization, and I also make a note of when the original form arrives, when I notarize it, and when I send it back. We'll take a look at my journal in a future video. There is also a mandatory script that both the signer and the notary must follow. Alabama's remote notarization law includes this information. And for those of you who have not read the law, I want to encourage you, stress that you do that as soon as possible. If you're not sure where to look, I do have a copy of the law at alabamaremotenotary.com. You can download and print it. I mentioned a moment ago that the probate judges did come up with a special notary certificate for remote notarizations. I believe as time progresses, that certificate will become more popular. You'll see it more. And again, I'll leave a link. In fact, I think I'll go ahead and add it to the website for you to download. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the other requirement is a video conference application. So that's what's needed. That's in comparison to what was needed for remote online notarizations. Do you see the difference? Now, very different from Iran, which is why I have been first unsuccessful, now reluctant to use a RON platform to conduct Alabama ink notarizations. There are just so many differences that a couple of years ago when I interviewed 3 to 5 RON platforms, none of them would work. Perhaps things have changed. Now, I've reached out to a couple new companies recently. We'll see what comes of that, but I refuse to cut any corners when it comes to this type of notarization. It is too involved, too serious. It is so important to me to be very careful and adhere to the letter of the law. And I want to encourage those of you notaries who are watching to be very careful. Another topic that I want to cover in this series is some litigation that a lawsuit was filed. The first remote online notarization lawsuit was filed in another state just a few years ago. So there's just so many opportunities to get it wrong that I am really going overboard with being careful. So we have covered the differences between the two types of remote notarization. I think it's time for us now to dive a little deeper into the signer identification requirements. We don't have time to do that in this video, but when we reconvene next time, I want to say a little more about the public and private sources of information, and in addition, really to share with the different types of IDs what seems to work best, because keep in mind, sometimes the resident is in Alabama, but most of the time, the customer, the signer, is in a different state or a different country. And so as you can tell, we still have a lot of territory to cover, but I really want to thank you for joining me for another video. This completes today's topic. I hope you learned something new. If you did, if you wouldn't mind, give this video a thumbs up, a like. If you have a question that you'd like for me to answer, even though it's not the topic of the day, go ahead and mention it in the comments or send me an email. I'll be happy to talk with you about that. You'll find my contact information in the channel description, or you can just post it below. And once again, if you are not a subscriber today, I want to encourage you to become one real soon. Thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you back here next time.